So I want to clarify something first. Student rentals. We never rent to students because I've never met a fourth grader that has the income to qualify. Just kidding. If they have the income, we'll rent them. Okay, so I want to tell you some stats first. So everybody know what this is? Yeah, what type of bird? Those are crows. They're all over Alberta, right? So in BC, just recently, there was 2,000 crows found dead beside the side of the road. Did you guys know that? And so they had a wildlife biologist go out, and they found out that 95% of them were killed by motorcycles. Motorcycles. They like match paint and stuff up for that. And the reason being is, you see how they have multiple crows? They usually have one lookout crow that caws, right? Well, they did the research and they didn't find any crows that could say motorbike. Just caw, caw. Okay, I guess it's funnier in my head, so. So we're going to start off with what is property management? Because that's one of the questions that we have all the time is we'll have someone phone and say, hey, so what exactly do you guys do? I guess I need to get in this camera here. So what exactly do you guys do? I can't even read that screen. So everything from advertising property, showing property, screening tenants. That's a big one. Sam did a great job of going through a whole bunch of different things about screening tenants. Interesting thing about that. So you can screen a tenant really, really well, and you can have an ideal tenant, but things can still go wrong. I'll give you a story. One of the first properties we ever owned was a 8-plex in Alberta Ave area. And I don't know if you guys know Alberta Ave. It's a rougher neighborhood, right? It's not Beverly Hills. And so we had this one-bedroom unit rented to this great gal. She had 3 jobs. Fantastic gal. And everything was going along great. And then all of a sudden we got a call from the police. And they said, we need a key to your building. And I said, well, what if we don't give you a key? And they said, we're going to kick the door in. And I said, where would you like to meet? And so we gave them a key, and we watched the tactical unit storm her suite. And we're like, what? How can they storm her suite? Well, it turns out she started dating a guy in the neighborhood. And the guy was using a sawed-off shotgun, holding people up at the ATM machines, and using her suite as a hideout. So you can rent to a great tenant, but it's who they hang around with, which is why Facebook is a fantastic resource for everybody. You get to see who their friends are, see what their lives are like, right? Collecting SDs and rent. Paperwork, leases, inspections, tenant concerns, questions, maintenance, renovations, collections, ledgers, evictions, RTDRS, statements, and owner concerns questions. So there's a lot of stuff on there that property management covers. Would you agree? Am I right or am I right? I'm right. So a lot of the times people start off and they do this themselves. Highly recommend that. If you can do it for your first 1 or 2 properties, if you have the ability to do it, highly recommend it. It is a fantastic learning. And then you will appreciate us so much more. So next is why property management. So what do you think the number one reason that most people want property management is? Tenants? Time? Plug toilets in the middle of the night? I'd say that's the major concern most people have. What if they call me in the middle of the night and they have a plugged toilet and I have to go fix it? It happens. Furnace goes off in the middle of the winter. That's a big issue, right? If you don't have the systems in place to deal with them, you can be in trouble. Out-of-town owners. That's another one. If you're not in town and you want somebody to have eyes on your property all the time, you hire a property manager. Time commitment, we heard that. So family, job, but also time commitment for just freeing you up to go find more property, if that's your plan. If your plan is to buy more property, well, if you're tied up in the day-to-day of your existing properties, then it doesn't give you as much time to go find new ones, right? Experience. So I had a list up there of all the different things that property managers do. There's a lot of experience on that page. It's learning from your mistakes. Or it could be a part of your business model with your joint ventures. You know, you can say, I'll find the deal, you bring the money to the table, but we're having an external person manage it for us, because that's what they do. So how do you choose a PM? You take a dart? No. So number one question I would ask is, do they own their own investment property, and have they owned it for a time? For ourselves, we started investing in 2003. We did all of our own property management for the first 5 years. Well, actually, ever since then, because we never ever did change. The reason we did it is we couldn't find a property management company that would do it the way that we wanted it done, from an investor standpoint. And that's why I say, do they invest themselves? I think a lot of property management companies nowadays, they're sort of an afterthought of a brokerage. You have a brokerage, they're selling property to investors, they start selling a whole bunch, and then they're like, oh, hey, wait a minute, there's a need for property management. Let's start up a property management arm. But they don't have the experience of managing their own properties and doing it in an investor-friendly way. Does that make sense? Good. Are they licensed with RECA? That's another one. There's a lot of protection that comes along with that. If you're a brokerage, your trust accounts, they're audited every year. There's monthly reconciliations. There's insurances in place. There's a lot of rules that we have to follow in order to manage property for owners. We have to make sure it's done right. If we don't do it right, we can get fined. We can lose our licenses. So, you know, that's pretty big. You want to make sure. So if you're going to manage or find a manager that's not licensed with RECA, they don't have to abide by all that. So they may not be doing it right. They might be doing shortcuts. You never know. Referral from other owners and professionals. You know, talk to other people. Find out who they're using. What do they like about them? What do they don't like about them? Right? Do they have great systems and software? There's tons of different software out. When we first started, we were using Excel spreadsheets for the first little while, managing our own property. Then it got fairly large. So we looked around, we found this software that we could buy for like, I don't know, $50 or something like that. It can manage up to 50 properties for us. So we used that for our own. Then we tried this software and that software. We finally, in 2009, we found a company called Propertyware down in the States. And there's a few good ones out there. Propertyware, Buildium, and there's a couple others if you search for that. Propertyware, it's a software that it's online based. We upload all of our documents to it. So it's a virtual filing cabinet, keeps track of all the tenant ledgers, keeps track of all notices, maintenance. All of our accounting is done through it. Owners have portals. They can go on 24/7, download leases for the banks if they need them. They don't have to run around and chase people to get leases. Tenants have leases. They can go on or tenants have portals, so they can go on, take a look at their lease. They can submit maintenance requests. Software really plays a big part of property management. And if you have good stuff, if you're managing your own, I'd highly recommend Propertyware. It's scalable, so you know, even if you have 5 properties, it's a fantastic piece of software. It'll save you a lot of time. Interview, that's a big one. And when I say both ways, I mean it is both ways. A lot of the good property managers, they won't just say, yeah, oh yeah, we'll take your property. They'll want to interview you. And they'll want to know what your property is like. Anybody know what the Black Triangle is in Edmonton? The Black Triangle. So the Black Triangle is a geographical location. 97th Street, so picture this in your head. 97th Street, the river, and Yellowhead forms a triangle. Okay, that's what we call the black triangle. We don't take on management there. We haven't taken on management there in a long time. Our rule is if taxi cabs don't go in at night, we don't go in during the day. Right? So, it's a little rougher profile. You can have a gem of a property inside that triangle, and you might get a great tenant. But guaranteed, you're going to be finding a new tenant when the term is up, because they won't stay there. If they're a good tenant, they're going to want to be in a good neighborhood. Am I right or am I right? Right. And what do they charge? There are so many different fees for property management. Typically, 10% of rents is what you should be looking at. But you can have 10% of rents. You can have 10% of collected rents. So that's how we charge out. We do it of 10% of collected rents. So if it's vacant, we don't get paid. If we put a tenant in that doesn't pay, we don't get paid. We have a pretty big incentive to fill a vacancy and do it with a quality tenant. Whereas other property management companies, they might say, well, it's 10% every month, whether it's filled or not. Well, where's the incentive to fill a vacancy for you guys, right? Because we hear that a lot from owners. In tougher times, we're out there busting it because if we're not filling vacancy, we're not getting paid. So we have a vested interest in your property as well. You can have lease-up fees. So just like Sam charges a fee to find a tenant for you, property management companies do that too. They charge it for advertising, they showing the property, doing all the leases up, all that kind of stuff. That can be a fee, and it can range anywhere from $400 up to 1 month's rent. It all depends on the property manager. I've seen property management companies where they bill out phone calls, postage, like you name it. They keep track of everything, and it's billed out. So you really have to take a look at their contract and find out what are all the costs associated with it so that you know what you're paying for. Okay, so let's talk about money flow from tenants to owners, because that's another question a lot of people have about property management is, when do I get paid? So I know you're in the middle and tenants pay you. Well, how does that all work? So this is how it works. So first of all, if you're licensed with RECA, you have to have a trust account. So all of our money goes into trust accounts, which are, like I said, audited annually. Monthly reconciliations have to be done. So it goes into the trust account. So there's a collection process. For us, we're large enough that we actually set up an EFT through TD, and we pull right from a tenant's bank account. The good thing about that is 2 days, we know if they bounced and who bounced. Whereas if you're collecting post-dated checks like we did way back when, we'd have 8 people that are paying $11.95, and the bank statement would say, oh, you have a bounce for $11.95. And then it's like, okay, which one is it? And we'd have to wait till the check came back to us until we knew which tenant it was. And that can take some time, whereas electronically it's a lot faster. On top of that, email transfers. That's a huge way that we collect rent nowadays. NSFs. So when NSFs happen, just like Sam was saying, eviction notices, we do things a little bit different. We're big believers in fixed terms too, and I'll have conversation with anybody about that. They're great. When it comes down to an NSF, if you do, just something you have to be cognizant of, if a tenant NSFs and you deliver a 14-day notice, that technically ends their lease if they take advantage of it. So if you don't want them to leave, let's say that you hear that they might be looking for a new place, they might want to move, and you give them an eviction notice. They may be doing that on purpose in order to get that piece of paper, in order to say 14 days from now, I can leave and I'm not responsible for the remainder of the lease. So what we do is we send out a rent reminder letter, right? So it's again, it's a notice, but it's not a 14-day notice, so that it doesn't end their lease should they want to take advantage of it. So just little things like that is experience, right? Push funds. So we collect all the money, wait for all the NSFs to happen. So usually about 2 weeks just to make sure everything all clears because we're dealing with trust accounts. If we collect on the 1st and then we pay you on the 2nd and the tenant bounces his rent and we find out on the 3rd, we can get fined for that because we're now short in our trust accounts. So any property management company that deals with trust accounts has to wait a certain amount of time to make sure all the money is cleared. Once it's cleared, then we electronically push it to your bank accounts at the end of the month. And then statements follow. So all of our statements are online. Most companies' statements are online. So statements, let's talk about them. So how many people love reading statements? What? Yeah, there we go. So statements, they can be actually pretty easy to read. Now, I was going to have a picture up here and show you what one looked like, but the print was about this big, so I couldn't. So I basically broke it down. So first of all, you have an opening balance. Most property management companies will have an opening balance, which means they have money on reserve for you in their trust account in case something happens between the time that they push funds to you and they collect new rent. So let's say in that time frame it's a week and I don't know, a fridge, something happens with a fridge or whatever, right? And it has to be dealt with right away. If it's a trust account situation, they need to have money of yours in that trust account so they can deal with it because they can't go in the negative. Does that make sense? So most property management companies will have a trust account balance. That's the opening balance on your statement. From there, you have the income. So you've got rent, and it'll show the rent. You have expenses, so you have property management fees. You've got maintenance and repairs, utilities, if utilities are included, stuff like that. Then you have contributions. So it may be a matter where your fridge goes, right? And let's go something bigger, a furnace. You need a new furnace or hot water tank. We won't replace that. If it's over $400, we don't do anything without your approval. So hot water tank, $1,000. So we would say to you, well, you need to send in $1,000 and then we can get that replaced for you. That goes under the contributions on the statement so that you can see, okay, this is where I put money in. Then you have draws. Draws are just the opposite of that. So that's your rent minus expenses minus your balance, and then gets pushed to you every month. So that's your draw. And then you have the closing balance. So typically you could see $300 as a trust account balance. You have $1,000 rent coming in. You have $100 of property management fees. You have $900 going back out. Does that make sense? If you guys have questions, I'm more than happy to answer them afterwards. Okay, let's talk about some expectations. Real or unreal? You tell me. So, the first one. Property managers, can they leap tall buildings in a single bound? Real. That's right. Tiny buildings. Lego. Can they fill vacancy in 24 hours? 12. Do I hear 6? This is a big thing for us because especially in harder times, filling vacancy is a tough thing to do. And if your expectations are it's going to be, I'm going to have it filled tomorrow and I'll have rent right away, might not happen. There's a lot of different factors that can be involved in that. Should make decisions in your best interest. That was a freebie. That's a yes, right? Can respond to your questions in 5 minutes. I don't know how many times I've seen 2 emails within 5 minutes and 2 messages in my phone. It's like, we're managing multiple properties. Give us a little bit of time, right? Expectations, right? Now, with that being said, it shouldn't be a week. 24, 48 hours, depending on the time of month. The end of the month, beginning of the month, rent collection, move-ins, move-outs, what's going on in our world too. Just be cognizant of that, right? How about can screen tenants so nothing bad ever happens? Right? We do our best. We really do. But like I said, like that scenario I talked about earlier, you can find the best tenant, but it's a matter of who they hang around with or who they get connected with. Neighborhood has a lot to play with it. Knows everything that goes on with your property. Real or unreal? So that's a little bit of both, right? It's unreal that we can have it right at the snap of our fingers, but we can find out, right? You just have to give us time and we can find that kind of stuff out. Sometimes neighbors, if you are renting a house that you used to live in and you know the neighbors on both sides, chances are they're going to know a lot more than we will because they're right there 24/7, right? Okay, you and your PM. That's property manager, just so you guys know. So I would argue, and I know James might argue with me, most important relationship. And lawyers would probably argue with me too. There's a lot of important relationships, but we're probably the longest relationship, right? We're dealing with your assets on a daily basis, probably for years, right? We've got portfolios where it's multi-million-dollar portfolios, right? So that relationship that you want to have, there's a lot to it. And the biggest thing I can say is just respectful interactions. There's been a lot of times in the past where we'll get 2-page emails about how we're doing things wrong because that's what their parents said, or that's what their friends said, or that's how it's done out east. Every province is a little bit different. And we like to think that we're doing our best, and we'll have conversations with our owners about that, as long as they're respectful. We're going to treat people equally, right? So birthday presents are fantastic. Christmas presents. I'm just kidding. But appreciating staff, that's a big ticket thing, right? We own the company, Carolyn and I. Carolyn's sitting at the back right there. But we have staff, right? And the staff deals a lot with the day-to-day. Some of the things that you can do to appreciate them, if someone does a good job for you, write a good review. Reviews go a long way in multiple facets. One is tenants nowadays, they look at property management company reviews, how they treat people. It's funny how most of the reviews that a property management company gets, and if you go to any property management company review page, it's almost all the same. It's funny, it's only when people are upset they give reviews. And property management, we're only dealing with people typically when there's something wrong, right? Oh, my refrigerator is broken. Oh, my stove is broken. It's not happening fast enough, right? Again, we're not superhuman. It's a relationship. And if we're treated well, we'll treat them well. And tenants are no different, right? We have this chat with the tenants too. You respect us, we'll respect you. We'll do whatever we can to help you guys out. But it's a matter of there are realistic expectations and there's unrealistic expectations. So with that, I'm pretty much done. I know it went pretty fast, but I sort of guess if there's going to be a lot more questions than there will be me just yammering up here a little bit. So I'm going to open up the floor to questions. None? No? No? Okay, over there.
What type of property do you specialize in? You're taking on?
Ones that are easy to rent.
Residential, multifamily, or?
Yeah, residential. So we don't really do any apartment buildings. There's other companies that do apartment buildings. They're a different business, believe it or not, multifamily, because you've got all the yard care to take care of, all the cleaning to take care of. The leases are a little bit different, common areas versus exclusive use areas. We specialize in single family. So a little bit about our story is, so we started investing in 2003. We bought about 50 properties in about 5 years, managed them all ourselves. And during that time, it was all single family homes, usually in the suburbs. That's what we purchased. That was back in the day when it was non-qualifying consumables. And we never went to the bank once to buy all of those properties. It was fantastic. Oh, reminiscing. But, so that's where we got our start, is single family. And that's sort of what we kept doing, is single family. We don't take on apartment buildings. Someone may phone us and say, hey, I've got a 50-suite apartment building, would you like? No. We're good at what we do, and that's all that we want to do. So we just keep doing what we do. So single family residential. Other property management companies, they specialize in apartment buildings, I'd recommend go and see them.
So where do you draw the line? Like side by side, duplex, fourplex?
We'd probably go up to a 4-plex or a 6-plex, depending on the property. Some of the 6-plexes, the tenants still take care of the yards depending on how they're structured and whatnot. But it's a matter of like snow removal and yard care. If you have to start doing that for the tenants, then it becomes a different business model, right? You have a lot more interaction between the tenants. So you want to make sure the mix is a little bit different as well. Marketing is different for that as well. Single family homes, Rent Faster, Kijiji, rent boards, places like that. You're finding the tenants on there fairly easily.
So a question, if somebody wanted to hire you guys, is there a fee just to get set up, get advertised, and get the vacancy? And then what is the average time to fill it? Like I know it's based on the property, but just as an expectation you set for the person.
Okay, so expectations. So our property management contract, so there's no setup fee. We do request a $400 trust account balance. And then there's basically no fees until we find a tenant. So we'll do the marketing, show the property, find a tenant, do up leases, do the move-in inspection, collect the SD, collect the rents, do all the statements. And then on your first statement, we do a lease-up fee of $400, and then our property management fee. So it comes out of the first month's rent is where our fee. So there's no upfront cost.
That's good.
So does that answer your?
Yeah, it does.
For you landlords, what would you say their biggest mistake is, and how would you not do it?
Oh, geez. Where to begin? So the question is, biggest mistake for first-time landlords. And I'd probably say it's just not learning enough right off the bat. You can get yourself into a lot of hot water if you don't know what you're doing. The Residential Tenancy Act, it's not a hard read, but it's something you should read. Even if you're going to have property management do it, read the Residential Tenancy Act so that when you're talking to your property manager, there's sort of a double check there, right? Because I know there's some property managers that sort of know what the RTA says, and there's some of them that don't. And the way they do things is not necessarily the way that should be done. And you want it done the way that it should be done. So I'd say the biggest mistake would just be going too fast on their own right off the bat. There's a lot, like it's a learning curve like this. When we started, there were 3 of us. So, there's, you take care of this, you take care of that, you take care of that. So if it's just 1 or 2 of you guys, you have to split it up and you have to learn a lot very quickly. You can learn a lot just by asking questions like that here. Any property management, I'm happy. Send me an email, ask me questions, I'll respond back to you. That's the way that you learn. And I'm very willing to share my information. So
How many properties do you manage?
we manage about 4.25. Not 4 and then a quarter. It's 425. So about 425. There's about 8 of us in the office. But again, we have fantastic systems in place. So, and I think that's a big thing. When I was 16, I worked for McDonald's, and I think that really set the stage for my life. That is a multi-billion-dollar company run by teenagers. It is. And why? Because they have fantastic systems. The Big Mac in Edmonton is the same as in Camrose. And it's all systematized. So any business, if it's systematized, will run so much better.
Speaking of systems, the two softwares that you had suggested, what made you choose PropertyWare over your
So Buildium and PropertyWare are both very, very similar. The reason we went with PropertyWare, I think they were first to the market. I think when we were researching, we found them first before Buildium. And, you know, you can do demos for a month with them. You can start off with one property in it. Very cost efficient. It's a subscription-based software out of the States. So it's really easy to get into, really easy to learn. It's very user-friendly.
Is there any difference between a Canadian-based software then? Like, do they understand the Canadian cost and US software?
Yes and no. So it is a US-based software. You can use it in Canada, but it doesn't deal with any legal issues or anything like that. If you want to mail merge leases and stuff like that, you have to upload your own. So you have to create your own leases in the software that they have. It can take a little bit of time, but you know, you can work through it. We do all of our leases separately, not through the software. If we're in the States, they do tenant screening, they do tenant collection, all through the software. But it's not offered in Canada, so.
And is that the same for both of those softwares?
I believe so, yeah. Most of the big software companies are US-based, so. Yes, it is uploadable to QuickBooks.
Two questions. How many do you have on staff?
8.
And 8. Okay, and how long is the commitment when we sign it?
So the way that we work with ours is we do a 1-year term, but we do a 60-day termination clause. So if you're not happy with us, give us 60 days notice, then go to somewhere else, do it yourself. We're not going to hold you, if you're not happy with our service, we're not going to hold you to a 1-year, right? So it just give us a little bit of notice so that we get all the ducks in a row, so. Way over there.
Curious, based on past history, where are we at in the market as far as vacancy, quality of tenants, compared to, let's say, a year or two ago? Where are we today? Are we bouncing off the bottom, or are we still?
Are you a fisherman?
No.
No. The reason I asked you, bottom bouncer is what you use for walleye, right? So, it's still tough in Edmonton. I think it's getting better. We do see a little bit of rise in some rents, depending on the property. Quality of applications is still pretty low. We'll have lots of people. I'd probably say that we turn away 7 out of 10 applicants. You know, and that's a lot. You know, you have 10 people come up, you might get 3 good applications out of it. Depending on the property, it might be 3 out of 20. You know? So I think buying a good property, that's a good remedy for vacancy, is buying quality properties. And I think James can probably help you out with that. So.
So how long do you expecting for a vacancy to be filled in a given range?
6 months. No, I'm just I'd probably, if it's a decent property, 1 to 2 months. You know, personally, I would probably budget for 3 months just to have it safe. Time dependent. If it's right now, yeah, 1 to 2 months definitely. If it's December, January, 3, 4 months.
Depends on the dwelling.
Yeah, and it depends on the dwelling, right? It's funny nobody wants to move when it's minus 30. I don't know why, but
Tyler, what areas of the city do you find command better tenant profile or like surrounding municipalities? And do you notice a difference?
suburbs are always really good, right? I'm a big fan of single family homes in suburbs.
How do you find like St. Albert?
St. Albert, I love it. I live there, so I might be biased, but it is a fantastic neighborhood. You know, it's been ranked number 1 for like 4 out of 5 years of best community living in Canada.
Hey, Tyler. Hey.
Yeah! So St. Albert's a great, you know, and tenant profile in St. Albert, a lot higher too, you know. Now, with that being said, the properties themselves tend to be a little bit more expensive and taxes are a lot higher because they don't have the industrial tax base, right? So I know in our house, taxes are crazy compared to Edmonton, definitely.
So do you charge an application fee for people to apply?
For tenants? No.
Yeah, tenants, okay.
No.
And what's your turnaround response time for when they want to do a showing?
So showings, again, it depends on the property. Some properties we do showing specifically for tenants.
Okay.
Let's say that we have someone phone in and they say, hey, I'm coming up from Calgary. I'm only here for the weekend. I'm looking for a place to stay. We will totally cater to them and show them 1, 2, or 3 properties of their choice, right? Other ones, we typically do group showings for multiple reasons. One, we're trying to show a lot of properties in a decent amount of time. 2 is you get a little bit of feeding frenzy action when you have 1, 2, 3 people show up at the same property, right? So they tend to fill out an application a little bit faster. You know, Carolyn did some showings today down in Camrose. Already have applications in the system.
So is it limited to like workday hours, Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, or?
No, we usually do showings pretty much any day of the week. We find what works best is between 2 o'clock and 7 o'clock. We try to catch people when they're heading home from work. Once they're home, they don't necessarily want to go out, especially in the winter, right? Or if it's really nice out and there's a patio calling. So it really depends on the property as well. So.
Where do you get your best for your advertisements right now?
Which?
Are you advertising? Where do you get the best results right now with systems?
So we're just reviewing all that right now. And one of the ones that's been a surprise is PadMapper. So I don't know if you guys use PadMapper at all, but it's surprisingly good results. A lot of people use Kijiji. What we find with Kijiji anyway is it's great if you have 1 or 2 properties, but if you go over 2, then you start getting charged